Hello and welcome to this new SAP Tech Bytes video with me, Marius Obert. Today I actually want to focus on a problem that many of you asked me in the past few days and weeks, and it was obviously not the same question that I got all the time, but I got this same type of question very often, and I just let me mention 3 of these questions so you have an idea what I want to talk about now. So the first question was how to add UI modules to existing CAP applications. So you started developing a CAP application, you did the bootstrapping, you added sample data, you connected to the SAP HANA database, and now you're at a point where you want to add your own SAP Fiori application. It could be Fiori Elements application, could be SAP Freestyle application. If you want to use, it could also be a React application that uses the REST interface of CAP. But many of you ask me, how can I do this? Or you were able maybe to add one application module, but you weren't sure how to add an app router. Or you added an app router with an application module, but now you wonder, how do I integrate a second application into this existing app router? And these are interesting questions that I also want to cover in this video. A second slightly different version of the question was that you want to have a separate module. So you already have CAP application or any OData service somewhere on the internet. It's provided to you, you have access, and now you want to add a project that has multiple web applications, Fiori applications, Fiori Elements, SAP UI5 applications in this UI-only module. That makes sense for multiple reasons. You could have follow a monorepo approach where you have one sub part or one workspace of the monorepo is the backend part, and the other part that you want to implement now is the UI part. That makes sense. And the last variation of the question was how to use or to create a new CAP module. So maybe you know how to add new UI modules to existing or to new projects, but you're not sure how to do this with authenticated endpoints. So for example, you have one CAP service that is protected by an access UAA to make sure only authenticated users are allowed to access it. And now you wonder, how can I use a UI module that accesses this protected endpoint? And how can I use the wizard to create this application based on this authenticated endpoint? And for the sake of this video, I want to combine all 3 problems in one big problem and show you how to solve it. So what we do, or what do we have before we start? I already prepared one CAP service. It's a typical bookshop that you know. It has a books entity and authors entity. It has 2 services. One is a public service that exposes all the books. It doesn't expose annotations. It's just a plain protection on the entity. And the second admin service has obviously CRUD access, so it can also edit, update, edit, delete, create new books. And it also comes with Fiori annotations. So for example, there, when you open a Fiori application, you won't have to select the columns first. The columns are already pre-selected due to these annotations. And you can just hit go to see the data and edit and remove it. So this is the situation where we're in right now. And what I want to show you in this video, how to create a new project from the scratch that only contains UI modules. It will contain one module that is an SAP UI5 application that consumes the public data, the public service, and a second SAP Fiori Elements application that consumes data from the protected endpoint. So this Fiori application should then only be accessible to admins. And then to round it all up, we deploy it to SAP BTP, Business Technology Platform, and we use the SAP Business Application Studio to develop it. And as you know, all the roads lead to Rome, so you could different tooling here and there. If you like something what you see, apply it to your usual workflow. So if you develop in VS Code, you can do most of the stuff with the Fiori tools also in VS Code. This is just to inspire you with the most straightforward way with the SAP Business Application Studio in deploying it to SAP BTP. Okay, I hope you're already excited. Let's get started. Let's start here. Let's have a look at my screen. Let's close the few other tabs here. And here you basically see this is the response of our bookshop. And when I show you the data, the landing page of the CAP service, you know the entities that you are already familiar with. There are authors and books in the admin endpoint, in the admin service. And in the public endpoint, we only have books. When you click on public, you obviously see the data. There's no authentication in front of it. But if you click on the book entity up here, you get unauthorized. This is what we want because only admins should be allowed to use it. Because here, this is basically a read-only service. And here you are able to use all CRUD operations. So you can update data and delete data as well, and as well as creating new data. Let's have a look at the landing page of the Business Application Studio. You see I already created or prepared one dev space. It's a dev space that I just created a few hours ago, so there's nothing special about it. It's just a plain SAP Fiori kind. And when we click on it, we see this beautiful loading animation, and shortly after, we see the welcome screen. So let's start with the first application, this SAP UI5 application that consumes the public endpoint. So we say start new project from template. And the first, I would say, pitfall would be that you select SAP Fiori application. And this would be the right choice if you were to create a project that has one Fiori application in it. But as we want to have one project with multiple UI modules, it makes more sense to start with a basic and empty project with basic multi-target application here. Let's select the name for this project and let's name it Tech Bytes, and I click finish. And now you notice a new workspace opens, and this workspace is pretty empty. There is an MTA YAML that doesn't contain any modules, no resources so far, but let's change that. So we could start creating the UI modules now, but we also need an app router to be able to consume these UI modules. So let's do that first. We say do a right click on MTA YAML, create MTA module from template. And here we have two options. We select app router configuration because, as I said, we want to have start with the app router, create that one first. We could select standalone app router. I always prefer the managed app router. Let's also lower the TCO of the solution, because then you won't have to pay for the memory that app router consumes because it's managed for you by SAP BTP. Be aware that you need to have a subscription to the Launchpad or portal service in order to use that. But don't worry, it's already included in the trial. So if you want to test this and reproduce this in trial, you can use the managed app router as well. Let's select a name for business service. Let's call it Bytes or Tech Bytes as well. And do we plan to add a UI? Yes, because when we add yes, it will also create a HTML5 app repo for us. And that's what we want. So we click next, and we immediately see that it added some content for the managed app router in the MTA YAML. So we have the destination content that creates destinations. It's important to know that these are instance level destinations. So you won't see them on a sub-account level in your cockpit later. So that's on purpose, and that also makes it easier to manage it, because otherwise each deployment will add more destinations for you. And besides this one module here, we also added 3 resources: destination resource, an HTML5 app repo resource, and a UAA. So that's all good. And now let's create our first SAP UI5 freestyle application. So go back to the welcome screen. In case you already closed it, you can click on help and on welcome here to get back to it. Click on start from template. So, and now it's a time where we can select SAP Fiori application here. As I said, for the first application, we want to use the SAP freestyle application. Let's say we want to use the work list template here just to have it easier. And then when we want to connect to a data source, we say connect to OData source. It's important that in the web IDE, you sometimes use the SAP system also to connect to OData sources, but now this option is exclusively for SAP backend systems such as an S4. So here, as it's a CAP application that exposes via OData, let's select an OData service. And let's go over here to select the public endpoint. public endpoint and paste the URL here and remove that ending so that we actually point directly to the public endpoint. You see that the next button is now enabled. Which object do we want to base this the template to be based on? Books, because that's the only option we have on this endpoint or in the service. Let's select ID here, title for the name of the object, the number of books we have in stock as the object number, and then confirm with next. Now it asks us for the module name, so we can say this is the user app or public app, both is fine. Application title, also say public app, description is not important. And here, this is important because you don't want to create a new project where you want to add this UI application as a module to the project we already created. So let's select also the TechBytes folder that we've created a few moments ago. And now you see it automatically recognized that there is already an mta.yaml there, to which we want to add the deployment configuration. We also want to use the FLP configuration in case later you want to add this application to a Fiori Launchpad. And in the advanced options, because I like the dark theme more than a light theme, let's use that one as well. And then confirm everything with next. Now it will ask us for a destination, because when we deploy this application to Cloud Foundry, it needs a destination in order to consume the service from the backend. I already went ahead, created a destination called Cup Books. We'll have a closer look at this in a few moments, but for now I just copy the word Cup Books. Was it book or books? It was books. So click next. And now it asks us like a few configuration options for the Launchpad. Let's say book view and call the app public app. This is what we'll see later in the Fiori Launchpad on the tile, and create the module. You see it's installing some dependencies, it's still doing some work, and while it's doing some work, let's have a look at the mta.yaml. You see right now no changes happened there yet, so we still have the same state that we had before we opened the wizard, but now actually you saw that the wizard is finished, and it created a new few new modules here for us. So let's collapse them so it's easier to see. So we have this public app that is our HTML5 module, which is new, and we have the app content that basically has a dependency on the public app and pushes it to the HTML5 application repository at deploy time. Okay, so let's create, or before we create a second app, let's run this application shortly so you see that it's working. I go to the run configuration, hit the green play button, and you see that it starts the Node.js project locally. It also recognizes there is a backend dependency to our service that we see here. And when we click open to preview the application, it loads the FLP sandbox. And in a few moments, we see the application is running locally in the SAP Business Application Studio. So here's the app. And here we already see the real backend data that is pulled live via the SAP Business Application Studio. Okay, that's great. So there are 2 books. Let's stop this. And now let's create the second application. So this time I could again go over start from template, but I want to show you a new option by the command palette, and I say just Fiori, generate Fiori open application generator. This time we select let's collapse this. Let's select the lists report object page, again, next. And once again, here we select OData service. And now this is the interesting part. So this is the answer to the question, how to use destinations or endpoints that are protected by authentication. So if you were to use basically this URL here that we see where it says unauthorized, and you just add it as is here, it prompts you for username and password because the Business Application Studio thinks that you need to authenticate because it gets the response unauthorized. But as this is not basic authentication, there's no point in filling out this information here. What we can do instead is create a destination in the SAP Cloud Platform Cockpit. So you here see the SAP Books destination that I already used in the previous step, but I used the OAuth 2 user token exchange type here. So that basically means I add the client ID and the client secret of the client ID and the client secret of the OAuth service that is connected to the CAP service. And then when I log in with my user here as Marius, I basically, the destination service exchanges my current token for a token of that particular CAP service. So basically, anyone who is allowed to access the CAP service can access the Bookshop Fiori application later on. So I don't want to go into more details. I know there are a lot of details that I didn't mention now, but all you need to know is if you set up this destination properly, you can go over here and basically remove the domain name, keep the /admin, and paste the name here and add a .dest as destware top level domain. The App Studio is doing some work, and then you see next button is enabled, which means it's successfully connected to this OData service. So here, now we have the option between two entities. Let's select books here. And the cool thing about this book service is that it's annotated with Fiori annotations so that, for example, you don't have to select the columns that you want to display. So if you start an empty SAP Fiori Elements application, it already knows how the data should be displayed. So I can just click next here. It asks me again for a module name. Let's say admin app is this one. Here again, select tag bytes, and it immediately notices there is an mta.yaml, so it adds deployment configuration needed for that module to the same mta.yaml, also FLP configuration, and again, dark theme is what I prefer as my options, and I click next. I once again get asked for the destination name. I select CAP books here, and here I can say books, and this time it's not view, but well, let's call it manage. Title is manage books, and this time we can say for admins only. Let's generate the application. You again see it's doing some work here, and in a few moments you see that it added a new module that is called admin app. I think that's what I selected here. Okay, so that worked. Let's collapse it all again. Public app, admin app. We have one app content, so it didn't create a second one, but actually it added a new requirement to the existing app content module. The rest is all the same. Let's select build MTA to basically build the project. And while it's building, I can show you one more detail that you might not be aware of yet. I already mentioned it briefly above that here we're using instance level destinations. So if you use instance level destinations, you have to be aware that these configuration options need to be set in the destination service. Okay, the build finished. Let's trigger the deployment, and while it's deploying, I can basically reference this blog post here that I wrote a few months ago. It's called it's not this one. It's this blog post about serverless SAP Fiori apps on SAP BTP. And this is what we use here. So basically it explains how to use the managed app router approach, what you have to do. So you have to have these properties in the manifested JSON. You have to have a destination content module with the following parameters. So in case you're interested, check out this blog post. I also linked it in the description. But you don't have to worry about this manually, because you could use the first step that I showed you with the right click on MTA YAML, generate new MTA module, And when you select application app router configuration here, it creates all that for you out of the box. And you can use that also from existing CAP applications or whenever you have an MTA YAML where you want to add an app router to. And besides that, what else is maybe something that might be interesting for you? Yeah, I could also, because before, let's start with that point maybe. There is this command that you might know so far, cf HTML5 list, and it basically pulls all HTML5 apps that are uploaded to the HTML5 application repository and prints them in your terminal. This is a command you might already know. It's a very useful command, but now you can also add this DI option for destination and instance level and insert the name of your destination service, which is TechBytes destination service in our case. So now it will only list apps that are connected to this destination service. And if you add one parameter, -u, and for that parameter, you have to have the D or the DI option used. And if you add U, it also prints the URL of the application, so you know where to access it. So let's have a look. The deployment finished. So now it should also print the URLs of our applications here. So it might take a few moments, but then you see a URL that here it is. Let's copy that. And this URL contains this CPP. CPP is the right value if you use the portal service. If you use the Launchpad service, if you subscribe to that service, just replace it with Launchpad and hit enter. And that's all you need to do. And you see I'm redirected to the UAA service, but because of SSO, I don't have to log in and I immediately see my application with the 2 books here. Let's do the same for the admin UI, because my user already has the admin scope. So when I open the application, after I replaced CPP with Launchpad, I should automatically be logged in to the application. So you see a Fiori Elements application. The metadata is there, so I don't have to select the columns. I already see the column of the book and the author name, which are actually columns of the referred entity. And if I hit go to request the data, I see the same 2 books, but this time I'm logged in as an admin. And let's say I want to remove a book. I just go here, click delete. The data is gone. So when I click go again, still 1 book there because I removed it from the database. And when I go back to the public app and I refresh it, you see only 1 book is there. So it's using the same CAP service, the data has been removed, and it's basically a separate project. So now you could say a different team is, so the UI developers, they have their own project that they work and they only connect to the CAP service that your backend engineers created. Or for example, a possible scenario would be that the UI developers, they use the nightly build. So the backend, so that you really separate the teams to have separate work streams, and that the UI folks only use what has been tested, what successfully completed all tests of the backend engineers. But there are many other reasons why you want to have a separate project. For UI apps, you could use, for example, a mono-repo approach where you have 2 projects in the same repo, to use, for example, a common Git flow and 1 Git repository, but to have just some more separation between these different components. That's it. I hope you were able to code along and that you enjoyed the video, and most importantly, that you learned a lot. So this was a short tutorial or video tutorial how to create an UI-only project to deploy to SAP BTP. There are 2 things that we didn't focus on too much that I want to focus on the next video. So first, we did not embed the Fiori applications in the SAP Fiori Launchpad, specifically the SAP Launchpad service. So this is also what I want to focus on in the next video. And the second thing is that I only briefly showed you the destinations and how they're configured. And in the next video, I also want to show you in more detail
how the configuration looks like, what the different consequences of these parameter choices are. And based on that knowledge, we will also be able to connect to a CAP service that is not hosted in the same sub-account. So the service this time was hosted in a different space in the same sub-account. So it shared many details, and we were able to use to exchange the OAuth tokens on the fly. In the next video, I will show you how you could use, or I show you a simple approach, how you could use the destinations to connect to a service that is hosted in a different sub-account and might be in a different region or even in a different global account. So see you next time.